Arizona Territory, 1884. The sun was still low when everything in Florence changed for Fiona Price. She had just stepped out of the mercantile, her arms full of flour and coffee, when the shouting started. Across the dusty street, a man had a child by the collar, dragging him by the arm through the dirt. The boy could not have been older than 6. His hat had fallen, his lip was bleeding, and he kept crying, "I did not take it. I did not take anything." The man Tally, the blacksmith, was red-faced and breathing hard. "You little rat, you gonna lie to me? You think I do not see you sneaking around my shed?" Fiona did not think. She dropped the sack of flour right there in the dirt. "That is enough," she shouted, marching across the street. She reached them in 4 long strides and pulled the boy behind her. "He is a child, Burke. You do not lay hands on a child. He was trying to steal from me. He is bleeding." Burke stepped back, eyes narrow. "He is not even from here. Some squatter's brat. Nobody knows who he belongs to." Fiona turned to the boy. "What is your name?" He sniffed and wiped his nose. "Orin." She looked back at Burke. "Well, now someone does." Burke spat near her boot. "You always did think you were better than the rest of us. You want him? Fine. Take him. But do not come running when he robs you blind." She did not answer him. She just reached down, took Orin's small hand, and walked away. By sunset, the whole town knew. Fiona Price, the schoolteacher's daughter who had taken over the boarding house when her father passed, had taken in a thief's child. She had stopped a man in the street. She had embarrassed him. And worst of all, she had done it without asking permission. The next morning, 2 of the town elders came to her porch. "The council decided," said Mr. Ravel, chewing the corner of his mustache. "Your boarders are moving out. We cannot have someone like you running a place in town. Not until you bring that boy to the sheriff and straighten this mess out." Fiona crossed her arms. "He is 6, and you are 23 and unmarried. You cannot afford to raise someone else's mistake. I am not giving him up." "Then you are out." By sundown, she and Orin were on a wagon headed north. She had packed what she could carry: a trunk of clothes, her mother's Bible, and a few cooking pans. She had nowhere in mind, just away from Florence, away from the judgment. They stopped to rest a few miles out, near a dry creek. She made a fire and heated beans while Orin sat quiet, watching her with tired eyes. "You hungry, sweetheart?" she asked. He nodded. She handed him the tin plate and sat beside him. The night wind was cold, and she gave him her shawl. "You have any family?" she asked. He shook his head. "Mama died. I do not know where my pa went. He left last winter." Fiona swallowed hard. "Well, then we will figure it out together." They spent the night under the stars, her coat wrapped around them both. The next morning, she woke to hoofbeats. A single rider approached from the east, his horse kicking up dust. He wore a wide-brimmed hat and a trail coat stained from riding hard. His eyes were sharp, and his jaw was set, but he slowed his horse when he saw them. "You folks all right?" he asked, voice low but steady. Fiona stood slowly, never stepping behind the wagon. "We are fine, thank you." He looked past her to Orin, who peeked out from the canvas flap. "That your boy?" "No, but I will fight for him like he is." The man dismounted. He held his hands up, showing he meant no harm. "Name is Westin Zane. Been driving cattle down from Show Low." Fiona's brow lifted. "You are far from Show Low. Got word one of my young ranch hands ran off with my horse. Been chasing that fool for 2 days. Rode through Florence. Heard about a woman who took in a stray boy and got tossed out for it." She stiffened. "Let me guess. They made it sound like I was crazy. They said you were loud." His mouth twitched a little. "But I like a woman who stands her ground." Fiona crossed her arms. "That's supposed to be a compliment." Westin shrugged. "I do not hand out compliments I do not mean." She studied him. He was not like the men in town, no smug eyes, no sharp tongue, just quiet, calm strength, the kind that did not need much talking. Orin tugged on her skirt. "Can we trust him?" Westin crouched to the boy's level. "You got a name, partner?" "Orin." "Well, Orin, I do not know about trust. But I can offer a ride and a warm meal. I got a cabin a few miles west. Not much, but it is safe." Fiona hesitated. She had never taken charity. But Orin's fingers were cold in hers, and her own stomach ached from hunger. She nodded once. They rode with him that afternoon. The cabin sat near a stand of cottonwoods, tucked beside a slow river. There were chickens, a smokehouse, and a porch that creaked when you stepped on it just right. Westin made them stew and let Orin feed the hens. That night, Fiona sat beside the fire while Westin cleaned his rifle. "You really mean to keep him?" he asked. "Yes." He looked over. "Even if it costs you everything?" She met his gaze. "Already has. But I would rather sleep beside the river with a good heart than in a fine house with none." His eyes lit a little at that. "That is my kind of woman." Fiona blinked. "What did you say?" He leaned back in the chair, a slow smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. "You heard me." She felt her cheeks warm, but she did not look away. When he turned back to his rifle, her eyes stayed on him a moment longer. And outside the window, Orin chased a chicken through the grass, laughing. Safe. For now. Fiona had lost everything. But maybe, just maybe, she was about to find something better. The hens were quiet that morning, heads down in the dew-wet grass. Fiona watched Orin scatter cornmeal from a tin pail, his bare feet pale against the packed dirt. He whistled while he worked, tuneless but cheerful. She'd never heard him whistle before. Westin stepped out of the barn, sleeves rolled and rope slung over one shoulder. His stride was easy, but his eyes moved with purpose as he studied the sky. "Storm's coming," he said. She followed his gaze. The far line of the hills looked bruised, clouds low and slow-moving. "Will it reach us?" she asked. "Not today, but we'll feel it by tomorrow." He tilted his head. "You know how to seal a window frame?" "I patched enough of them back at the boarding house." "What?" "Couple panes in the loft need tending." "If you're willing, I'd be obliged." She nodded. "I'll see to it after breakfast." He gave a quiet grunt of approval, then turned toward the corral. Fiona went inside, stirred cornmeal into hot water over the stove, and cracked 2 eggs into the skillet. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and bacon grease. She opened the window to let in the breeze, then pulled out plates from the cedar hutch. Orin came in with dirt on his knees and a feather stuck behind his ear. "Can I help, Miss Fiona?" She handed him the tin cups. "Set the table." He worked carefully, tongue tucked in concentration, aligning each piece just so. When Westin came in, brushing hay from his shirt, Orin pointed to the plates and said, "I did that." Westin gave a nod. "Looks better than I manage." They ate in a quiet rhythm, the kind that settles in when folks know each other well enough not to fill silence for its own sake. Afterward, Orin helped carry the dishes, and Westin brought in a crate of tools from the porch. Fiona followed him up the loft ladder, a hammer in one hand and a strip of oilcloth folded under her arm. The loft smelled of cedar and old hay, with a single narrow window tucked beneath the eaves. She knelt beside it, tested the frame with her fingers. The wood was soft in one corner. "Needs reinforcement," she said. Westin crouched beside her, laying out nails and a rasp. "I figured you'd know what to do." She glanced at him. "You always this trusting?" "I'd say no, but I watched you give a child your shawl without flinching." She didn't answer. The wind rattled the pane. He handed her the hammer. "You take the top corner. I'll brace the sill." They worked in tandem, the kind of quiet labor that didn't need explaining. She held the cloth while he nailed it down, his fingers steady near hers. Their shoulders bumped once when they reached for the same tool. Neither pulled away. When they finished, she stood and looked out over the land. The cottonwoods swayed in the breeze, and the river glinted pale blue beyond the pasture. "You built this place yourself?" she asked. "Mostly. My brother helped raise the beams. He's up in Pine now, got a family of his own." "You ever think of doing the same?" He didn't answer at once. Just stared out the window, thumb hooked in his belt. "Thought about it. Once. Before the war." His voice was flat, not bitter, but distant. "But I came back different." She turned to him. "How so?" "Hard to say. Things I used to want didn't seem real anymore. The land made more sense." Fiona didn't press. She knew the look in his eyes, recognition of what couldn't be put into words. They climbed down from the loft, and Westin stepped out to check the fence line. Fiona scrubbed the pans, listening to Orin hum to himself while he drew pictures in the dirt outside. She found him sitting cross-legged near the porch, a stick in his hand. "What's that?" she asked, crouching beside him. "A horse," he said. "But it's got wings. Doesn't look like it's got enough to carry it." He frowned, then added longer lines. "Better." She nodded. "Much." That evening, Westin returned with a split lip and dirt on his boots. "What happened?" she asked, rising from the porch step. "Caught up with the boy who took my horse. He's 15, scared to death." Didn't put up much of a fight. Did you bring him back? No. Left him with a preacher couple near Camp Verde. He'll be fed, and they'll keep him honest. She studied him quietly. That was kind. He shrugged, then winced from the cut on his lip. He was just running from something. I know the feeling. Fiona fetched a damp cloth and cleaned the blood from his chin. He didn't move, just watched her with a stillness that made her chest tighten. You don't flinch easy, he said. Neither do you. His eyes didn't leave hers. You ever think about staying? Her hand stilled against his jaw. She didn't answer right away. I haven't thought that far, she whispered. He nodded, as if he understood not to push. That night, Fiona stood by the window, watching moonlight catch the river's edge. Orin was asleep on the cot, one hand curled around the feather he'd found. She didn't know yet what she had found here, but something in her had begun to settle, like the first few drops of rain that darken the dust before the storm rolls in. The storm rolled in before dawn. It wasn't loud, just steady, like a hand pressed firm against the earth. Rain tapped slow against the roof, soaking into the seams of the world. Fiona woke to it, the hush of it in her ears, and the faint scent of damp soil rising through the floorboards. She lay still for a moment, listening, then rose, careful not to wake Orin. He was curled beneath the quilt Westin had brought in from the barn the night before, one foot sticking out, twitching with sleep. Downstairs, the fire still held a low glow. Westin had left a kettle warming, and beside it, a folded cloth with half a biscuit inside. She stared at it, then slid it toward her with both hands. Warm. He must have been up already. The door creaked. She turned, expecting him. Instead, it was a girl no older than 16, soaked to the bone, mud streaked up both calves and a cut across her temple. She clung to the edge of the door, eyes wide and rimmed red. Fiona crossed the room in 2 steps and caught her before she collapsed. Help me, the girl whispered. Fiona eased her onto the bench by the hearth and fetched a towel. The girl flinched when Fiona touched her forehead. Name? Fiona asked gently. Lena, she said. I'm from the Canyon Road. My uncle, he tried, her voice locked in her throat. I ran. Fiona didn't ask more. She wrapped her in a dry blanket and pressed the biscuit into her hand. Lena took it with trembling fingers, eyes darting toward the loft. No one will hurt you here, Fiona said. The door opened again, and Westin stepped in, dripping from his shoulders down, hat in his hand, and his rifle slung across his back. His eyes landed on Lena, then on Fiona. She came through the trees, Fiona said. Something's not right. He nodded once, slow. I saw tracks. Someone's been trailing her. 1 man. Maybe 2. Fiona's lips tightened. If they come here, they won't reach the porch. He knelt near Lena, keeping his voice steady. Anyone know you came this way? I don't think so, she whispered. I just ran. Westin stood and reached for the box beneath the stairs. Inside was a pistol, a small one, but clean and loaded. He handed it to Fiona. Stay inside. Watch the back wall. If anyone touches that door, don't wait. She didn't blink. I won't. He turned to Lena. You stay low. You hear anything strange, don't move. Then he was gone, the door shutting behind him without a sound. Fiona led Lena to the rear room, slid the bolt on the window, and pulled Orin's cot behind the door as a barrier. Orin stirred upstairs, his voice muffled. Miss Fiona? Stay where you are, she called softly. It's just the rain. She sat on the floor with the pistol on her lap, heart drumming loud in her ears. Lena leaned against the wall, blanket drawn tight, eyes open but unfocused. Outside, the rain thickened. An hour passed, maybe 2. Then hoofbeats. 1 horse, then another. Fiona stood, careful, and looked through the narrow gap between curtain and frame. 2 men on horseback, both travel-worn, one with a rifle across his saddle. They looked toward the barn, then the cabin. The taller dismounted and stepped toward the porch. He raised his hand to knock. Before he made contact, Westin's voice rang out from behind the shed. You stop right there. The man froze. Just looking for a girl, he called out. She's run off. Family matter. Westin stepped into view, rifle aimed steady. You can turn around and keep looking. The second man drew his reins tighter. Ain't your business. It is now. The taller man spat into the mud. What's she to you? Westin didn't answer, just cocked the rifle. A long silence stretched between them. Then both men backed away, wordless. They turned their horses and rode slow into the rain, heads low. Fiona watched until they were gone. Then she lowered the curtain and sat down hard, the pistol still in her lap. Westin came in soaked to the skin, his boots leaving puddles on the boards. Fiona stood and met his eyes. "They're gone," he said. Lena was asleep now, curled beneath the quilt Orin had brought down. Fiona looked at the girl, then back at Westin. "They'll come back." "Maybe," he said, "but not tonight." He took the pistol from her hands, checked it, and set it on the shelf. "You all right?" he asked. "I am now." He looked toward the fire, then back to her. "You didn't flinch. I had a child behind me." A beat passed. Then he said, softer, "You always carry that kind of weight without complaint?" She looked at the floor. "Someone has to." He stepped closer, not touching her, just standing near, like he was learning the shape of her presence. "I built this place for quiet," he said. "Didn't think it'd be worth much more than that." "It's more than quiet," she said. He met her eyes, the space between them charged with something that hadn't had a name until now. She didn't move away. Neither did he. And in the hush that followed, the storm began to fade, the sky outside paling to a dull gray light as dawn began to press its hand against the hills. By the time the sun fully broke over the trees, Lena was sitting up, her hands wrapped around a tin mug of broth. Her eyes were clearer now, though her shoulders still curled inward whenever a floorboard creaked. Orin sat beside her on the hearth, offering pieces of dried apple from a cloth bundle and whispering stories about the rooster that wouldn't leave the porch. Fiona stood at the sink, sleeves rolled, washing the morning's dishes in warmed rainwater. Westin leaned near the doorframe, coat draped over one arm, watching the yard as if the world might shift again if he didn't keep an eye on it. Fiona glanced over her shoulder. "You think they'll circle back?" He shook his head once. "Not for a while. Men like that don't like being turned away. But they're not brave enough to come through when someone's looking straight at them." She dried her hands and stepped closer. "She can't stay hidden forever." "No, but she can stay here until her blood stops jumping." Fiona folded the cloth slowly, thinking. And then, Weston's voice dropped lower. "Then we see who she wants to be." In the yard, the hens picked their way through the wet grass. The air smelled of last night's rain and the sweet rot of fallen cottonwood leaves. Fiona stepped out onto the porch and leaned against the post, watching the clouds begin to break apart. He joined her, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the fence line. "You ever think about leaving Arizona?" she asked. His jaw moved once before answering. "Thought about Texas. Thought about Montana. Never went." "Why?" "Land's the same underfoot no matter where you go. It's the people that make a place mean something." She looked down at the porch rail, running her fingers over the groove someone had carved into the wood long ago. "I used to think I'd spend my whole life in Florence. Thought I'd teach school, maybe marry someone steady. What changed? I saw what steady meant there. It meant silence, letting men lay hands on children in the street and pretending not to see." He didn't interrupt, just waited. She turned her face toward the breeze. "When they told me to give Orin up, I realized I'd never belonged there in the first place." Weston's voice was quiet. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to see what was never yours." She looked at him. "And sometimes it takes someone willing to stand beside you for the pieces to start fitting again." He didn't smile, just nodded, slow, like he was filing that truth away. Inside, Lena stirred the fire higher, and Orin started humming something tuneless again. The sound of it filled the cabin like the first few notes of spring. Weston looked toward the barn. "Got a couple heifers calving soon. Could use help fencing the east pasture. If you're thinking of staying." Fiona's heart beat once, low and certain. "I know how to drive a post," she said. He lifted his brow, just slightly. "You know how to mend a saddle?" "No," she said, "but I learned fast." He stepped down from the porch and offered a hand. "Come see the pasture. You can tell me what you think of the lay of the land." She took it without hesitation, her palm fitting against his like it had always meant to find its way there. They walked past the creek, where the water moved slow and clear, and into the open stretch beyond the cottonwoods. The earth was soft but solid, and the fence line ran nearly straight until it met a rise of rock near the far trees. He pointed to a spot where the post sagged. "That's where the coyotes get in." She studied the terrain. "You've got runoff pooling here. You'll want to dig a drainage trench." He looked at her, not surprised, just quietly impressed. "You see things. I've had to." They stood there a moment longer, the wind lifting her hair, his hat tipped low against the sun. "Westin," she said, voice quieter now. "When you said I was your kind of woman, did you mean that as a passing word, or do you hold to it?" His gaze didn't waver. "I meant it. And I don't say things I don't intend to make good on." She stepped closer, the space between them tightening like a drawstring. "I've never had someone mean what they said," she admitted. "Well," he said, "you do now." He reached for her hand again, but this time held it longer. Not like someone offering help, but someone offering a place. They didn't kiss. Not then. But they stood together until the sun passed noon, and the cottonwoods cast long shadows across the field. Behind them, Orin's laughter drifted from the porch, and Lena's voice followed, steadier now, as she called for him to come help stack wood. Fiona turned toward the house. "You think they'll be all right?" she asked. Westin looked at her, then toward the porch. "They'll be more than all right. Same as us." And for the first time since she'd left Florence, Fiona believed it. By mid-autumn, the cottonwoods along the river had turned to gold. Their leaves held stubborn to the branches despite the wind, casting flickering sunlight across the cabin's porch. Fiona stood near the chopping block, sleeves rolled to her elbows, splitting kindling with clean, practiced strokes. The air held that dry sharpness that meant winter wasn't far off. Lena was at the creek, washing linens in the cold shallows with Orin helping her rinse. Her cheeks had filled out some, and she smiled more easily now. She'd taken to reading in the evenings, eyes tracing each word slow and careful, and she'd started stitching a patchwork coverlet from old shirts and flour sacks without being asked. Fiona had just bundled the last of the kindling when Westin came up from the south pasture, one hand wrapped in a cloth. She set down the hatchet and crossed the yard. "What happened?" she asked, already reaching for his hand. "Snagged it on barbed wire," he said. "Pulled too fast." She peeled back the cloth. "You need this cleaned proper." "It's nothing. You're bleeding through linen." He didn't argue again. Inside, she washed the wound with warm water and wrapped it in clean muslin. He watched her work, his eyes not on the injury, but on her face. When she tied the knot, he caught her wrist gently. "You've made this place more than I ever expected it to be," he said. She didn't pull away. "I didn't do it alone. You stayed when you didn't have to. I stayed because it was the only place that ever felt like mine." He let go then, but not far. "I've been thinking," he said, "about that schoolhouse in Pine. The one that's sat empty since spring. I remember. You said it was falling in from one side. Some of the roof timbers are bad, but the bones are strong. Folks up there have children. A teacher could make good use of it." Fiona leaned back against the table. "You think they'd trust me? They'll know your name. I told them about Florence. About Orin. About what you did." She swallowed. "And they didn't turn their backs?" "They asked when you'd be arriving." She sat with that a moment. "Then, I never thought about starting fresh somewhere that wanted me. You wouldn't be alone." She looked up. "You mean to come with me?" He nodded once. "I've got land near enough to ride and come morning. Cabin's smaller, but it's mine. It's waiting." "And Lena?" "Already asked her. She wants to go. Said she's ready to stand on her own feet." Fiona smiled. "She's nearly there." Outside, Orin shouted something about a frog slipping his grip, and Lena's laughter followed, light and unrestrained. Fiona turned back to Westin. "And what about us?" He stepped closer. "That's not something I want to leave to chance." She searched his face. "You're offering more than a house, aren't you?" "I'm offering a life. One with you in it. If you'll have me." Fiona didn't speak. She just reached up and cradled his jaw with one hand, thumb resting against the edge of his cheekbone. Then she kissed him, slow and certain, like she'd known for weeks it would come to this. He leaned into it, steady and sure. Later, after supper, Lena sat mending a hem near the hearth while Orin practiced his letters on a scrap of slate. Fiona pulled the curtain shut against the dark and turned to Westin, who was oiling the harness by lantern light. "When do we leave?" she asked. 3 days, he said. "Wagon's nearly ready. We'll go slow, stop by the trading post near the ridge." She nodded. "We'll need more salt and winter seed. We'll get what we need." She crossed to him, resting her hand on his shoulder. "You've already given me that." That night, with Orin snoring soft in the corner and the fire low, Fiona lay curled beneath the quilt, Westin beside her. He reached for her hand beneath the covers, their fingers finding each other without hesitation. Neither of them spoke. There was no need. The quiet between them held more than words could offer. They left on the third morning, the wagon packed with blankets, tools, and the books Fiona had saved from Florence. Lena rode beside her, head held high, a small sewing kit tucked into her satchel. Orin sat up front with Westin, pointing out birds and rabbits as they moved through the low hills. It took 2 days to reach Pine. The town was small, its buildings lean with age, but the people came out when Westin rode in. They greeted Fiona by name, shook her hand, and offered the use of the schoolhouse without question. By week's end, the roof had been patched and the stove cleaned out. Fiona stood at the front of the single room, chalk dust on her skirt, sunlight spilling through the tall windows. Westin leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with quiet satisfaction. "You look like you belong here," he said. "I do." He stepped forward and took her hand. "We'll build the rest. One day at a time." And they did. Through frost and thaw, through planting and harvest, they kept building. The cabin filled with warmth and the scent of bread. Orin's handwriting grew steady. Lena took up a needlework trade and started teaching other girls. And each night, when the lamps were out and the house was still, Fiona curled beside Westin with her hand resting over his heart, their breaths falling into rhythm. Come spring, they planted a row of cottonwood saplings beside the schoolhouse. And when the first buds unfurled, Fiona pressed her palm to the bark and whispered thanks for all she'd found. She never looked back. There was no need. She was home.